Welcome to Getting Started with Dialog Chains. If you haven't purchased the product, I suggest checking out the video and the link. It gives a really good idea of the features of the product. This video is more just for getting started and customizing dialog chains to work with your project specifically. But if you just want to see the features, check out the video below. The first thing you need to do when you import dialog chains into your project is to make sure that if you already have an editor folder, that you just move this chain editor scripts into your editor folder. If you already have a resources folder, then just move this chain resources folder into your resources folder. If you don't have those, then you would just leave it like this, because you're going to need an editor and a resources folder, and they both need to be directly in the assets folder. So they can't be a subfolder of anything, they just have to be right here on top. Alright, the next thing you have to do is create an empty game object. I like to call it dialog controller, and then add the component dialog controller. It's just a script that controls the dialog. You need to go into your resources, and in your prefabs you have a dialog canvas. Drag that dialog canvas up to your canvas prefab, and that's just the canvas that all the dialog boxes will go onto. Next, you need to set your containers. So just drag these to their appropriate container. These are all the different containers that you can choose from. They're basically, they hold the position of the dialog box, the size of the box, the font information, and all of that. And you can choose from each of these in your dialog chains. And then your box image is what you want your box image to look like. So, you should make your own box image to go along with the graphics of your own project, but dialog chains comes with a few, so we're just going to go with this old school box image. This is for the dialog box specifically, and then this is for the box that shows the name of the person speaking. So if you want those to be different, you can make them different. If you want them to be the same, you just drag the same image to each of them. And then again, when you're in dialog chains, you can choose which box image to use if ever you want to use a different one. But right now we'll just stick with default, and we'll stick with the old school image right there. And that is pretty much it. That is the main thing you have to do to actually start using dialog chains. But if you want to really take advantage of everything that it has to offer, you have to do a little more customizing for your project specifically. And the way to do that, and I'll make more tutorials to get more advanced, but just to stay on the easy side, the best way to do that is to go to your scripts, go to your dialog chain preferences. Dialog chain preferences is a script that holds all of the variables specific to your project. It's a lot, and you can read through it to really customize your project to work with dialog chains. But I'll just go over the main things that you have to do to get it working. So the first two variables, we have our inputs to advanced dialog and inputs to advanced dialog quickly. Now, inputs to advanced dialog are the buttons that you press once the text of the dialog has completed writing itself. You would push any one of these buttons to advance to the next piece of dialog. Inputs to advanced dialog quickly are while the dialog is typing itself out. If you push this button, it'll finish typing itself out so you can see the entire text. I like to have those the same button, and right now I only have them as submit. If you want other buttons, you can put a comma and type in whatever string for your button that you want, like fire1, and all of those will work. Where this string comes from is over here in edit, project settings, input. Unity has a string for all of these buttons, and what you do is you look at the button and you set what button on the keyboard or mouse or wherever that you want to push for this to work. So right now the space button or the enter button will trigger this submit input, and so because this is the button that I want to push, I use submit over here in this array of strings. So submit will both complete the dialog text while it's writing the screen, and it will tell the program that it wants to move on to the next piece of dialog. all these other things are important, but again, this is just to get started. This variable here is to halt your character's movement. So I recommend having a bool that you can trigger to stop your character from being able to take movement commands. And so whenever you talk to a person or to an NPC, you won't be able to run away while they're talking to you. If you want that, then you don't need a halt movement button, but you're going to have to set this to equal something in your project. I mean, you may never use it, but you still have to return true or delete this line so that you don't get any errors. But yeah, basically where this is my halt movement variable for this example program. It's in tempGameController.instance.haltMovement, and you can put whatever variable, you can point this to whatever variable is your halt movement bool. And then this is to set that bool. So dialog chains, you'll tell it if you want it to set that bool to true or to false. So again, you point this to where your variable is, and then set it equal to set to. So when we call this method, it'll set that variable to either true or false, so you can properly halt the movement of your player. If your game, like many games, allows the player to name themselves, or have decide a gender for themselves, or to pick the portraits that they want to have for themselves to display when they're speaking, you have to tell dialog chains where you're holding the variables for all of those things. So when dialog chains calls get player name, you'll return the variable that holds the player's name. And when dialog chains wants to add experience by a certain amount to your player, you tell it how to do that. Or if your player can choose between male or female, you tell it where that bool is right here. And then this is a list of sprites for if you have multiple facial expressions for your player. You return that here, and even if you don't have multiple expressions, you still, if you're allowing your player to choose a portrait for themselves, that you're going to have to store that in a variable, and so you can return a list of just one, basically. Basically you're just telling dialog chains where you're holding that variable so it can access that. This is something I'll do another tutorial about later. It's a lot more complicated than getting started. Items are also a little more complicated, but the main thing I'll say for items is you need to, for your items, if they are scriptable objects, which I recommend that they are, they need to inherit from item, or their base class needs to be called item for dialog chains to use them properly. Dialog chains comes with a script that says item, and you can see that there's nothing there. It's just a blank scriptable object called item. And this line right here, create asset menu, just means that when you right click, you can create an item. Did I do that? Oh, I did. So right here I have an item called silver key, and all it is just a blank item called silver key. But your project is going to have items that probably have attributes like a sword or a shield or something like that, and so you're going to have a scriptable object that has data inside of it. It just has to inherit from item, or the base class just has to be called item for dialog chains to use it. And then again, I'll do another tutorial specifically about how to mess with this right here, but basically all you'll have to do is come into this script and tell dialog chains how to add an item to your inventory. So when this is called add to inventory, it's going to be passed an item, and you just tell dialog chains what to do with that item to add it to your inventory. And I have my example right here with temp game controller having a dictionary called inventory, with an item and an integer showing how many of those items you have, and then all it does is just adds an item. If it doesn't already contain it, it creates a key for that item, and if it does already contain it, it just adds 1 to the count of that item. And then removing it is the same way. It checks if it exists. It removes one if there's more than one. If there are only one left, it removes the whole item from your inventory. And then this is checking to see if that inventory contains that item. All of these things are just something you'll have to customize to really get the full features of dialog chains, because I don't know how your project handles inventory. So you just need to tell dialog chains how it does that. These three are if you don't use scriptable objects for items, you can use a string instead of scriptable objects. If that's true, you need to change this to false. You need to tell dialog chains that you're not using scriptable objects for items. And then when you're choosing an item in the chains, you can tell it that you can tell it what item you want to give based on the string name of that item. And again, you're still going to have to tell it how to add using that string, how to add an item to your inventory, how to remove it from the inventory, and how to find out if that item even exists in the inventory. But for right now, just to get started, you can just use the temp game controller that it comes with, which has an inventory itself. And then finally, these are something I'll do another tutorial about. There's a lot more advanced things that you can do with dialog chains, but this is just getting started, so we're not going to really talk about this right now. And that should be it. If you want to start making dialog chains for real, you should check out the next video. We're going to go over all of the features it has to offer, and we're going to make a really terrible little game that no one would ever want to play, but it's going to show you everything that you can do with this product. So please check that out and let me know what you think.